Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think it is sufficiently clear what your positions are, and you have now the opportunity to fight each other with good arguments or even better ones. But before we start this discussion, I would like to address another question. We are in the midst of the Glasgow Climate Summit. Could you comment a little bit on what is your impressions, what's happening there? I mean, we have comments from Biden of his climate czar, John Kerry, and Greta, of course, as always, and she calls it till now a huge blah, blah, blah. So is it that? Can we say we have opportunities to go on with that, or will it end more or less as Paris ended? Maybe, Lucas, you start with that.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to get this question because there is some misunderstanding what actually a COP is and what it can achieve and how it works. So can you provide you a bit an inside perspective there?
Please.
You know, the climate delegations of the different countries, there are highly skilled and educated people working very hard in the preparation during the meetings and afterwards. But what is the reference point of these people? It is not global welfare or science directly, it's national politics. It's their own governments, their own parliaments, their own lobbies. They have a mandate and they live in their mandate. So it's not that we have an international parliament doing now environmental policy, deciding on a carbon tax. It's 200 times national policies. Can you grasp how complicated it is? Even worse, decisions have to be unanimous. Now you can see you have so different countries, oil exporting countries, rather clean countries, then you have small island states, very, very heterogeneous crowd. Everybody has to be on board in the end. It's almost impossible to do that. So this is just to tell you that you should not have too high expectations. If you want your country to go there and to have something achieved, you have to give your own delegation the mandate to do so. But the work at the COP itself, it's super tough. You know, there are drafting exercises. We have, say, a text for a decision, and you have different paragraphs, and everybody in the room has to agree on exact the same wording. Shall, should, here and there, and it's amazing. And then you have some countries which are blocking constantly, and I don't know what happened in Paris to make them silent, but somehow it happened, but usually they are coming up, and they basically are not constructively discussing. So don't have a too high expectation of what's coming, but at the current stage, I would still say if you can confirm Paris goals, if you can do something in climate finance, I would say it is an achievement, but then the action has to be at home, in your country. You have to force your own government. If you don't achieve that, we cannot do it at the COP.
Absolutely, thank you. That's an important answer because in the end, the single most important question is how we do it politically. How is it politically feasible to go through that? If we look at China, at India, United States too, I mean, there are really different opinions on that. And one goal is, of course, science and a good Mother Earth, and the other is really national interests, as we see China already preparing for the next cold and storing carbon and so forth, the support of electricity. Rick, please.
So first, the optimistic note. I mean,
yeah,
we've had 40 years of terrible summits. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the story of Lucas is perfectly fine. But the two optimistic notes are methane. So methane is, it comes from the earth, from agriculture, from land waste, from cattle, burping and farting. But it's highly aggressive. A factor maybe 10, 20 times more aggressive than CO2 in terms of temperature increases. So people say they do something about it, but the biggest emitters are not on the table. Second thing that there's some positive hope is deforestation, or forestation if you want. That's extremely important because trees absorb CO2. So, and it's a natural way of absorbing CO2 and preventing global warming. So every time you knock down rainforests, that's bad for everybody. So, and even Brazil signed up. But I fear, and I think that if we look back 5-10 years later, that were all nice agreements, but but then in the end it will all be flouted and things like that. So that's my story. So the reason is that why it's so complicated is that it's and I'm sure Jean Tirole will talk about it in his talk on the international parts. That is, it's a double externality. It's a double problem for economists. It's the biggest international externality on the planet. So you have these huge international free rider problems. So everybody would like everybody else to cut emissions, but not themselves. And secondly, it's a big intergenerational ask, because you're asking current generations to make sacrifices for future generations. And so you really need to find a way of compensating the current generations by running up debt and giving transfers from future generations to current generations. And you need to find ways of transferring bribes, if you want, or transfers to those countries that emit a lot. But imagine what that takes. You're asking then in your own country to say, look, we're giving Russia a lot of money to stop them producing too much gas, or we're giving the Gulf countries a lot of money to bribe them not to stop emissions. I mean, it doesn't pass the political smell test. It's not going to happen, is it? So that's why it's very complicated, and we need more clever mechanisms.
Thank you.
I leave that for Jean Tirole.
Thank you also that you referred to Nordhaus as free riders, because it's a very important problem. Yeah. People who profit from that are doing nothing because the coasts are still national. Bjørn.
Yeah, so I think the whole point is, it's COP26. We've had 25 before, exactly. And there's a reason why this is incredibly hard. And fundamentally, it's just not a political winner to say, let's all get together, promise stuff we don't want, and then go home and actually deliver it to help future generations in a far-off time. That's just an incredibly hard political sell. So the reality is, and I find this vastly underreported, but the UN Environment Programme actually did a study where they assessed, what was the impact of the 2010s, so our last decade of climate policy? And their conclusion was it was a lost decade. This was the decade where we had Paris, remember. They say they can't tell the difference between what actually happened with emissions and if we had not cared about climate at all since 2005. This tells you something. This tells you that you hear all these amazing stories coming out of one more summit where we promised all these things, and I agree, the methane could actually be a good idea, but it's really just on the margin. What I showed you before on Nordhaus, this is the kind of stuff that would be really smart to do. But even if we do it really smart, it's not going to matter very much. And so I totally agree with Lucas on the point, this is going to be solved by innovation. And let me just give you this very, very briefly. If somebody comes up with a technology that is cheaper and just as reliable as fossil fuels right now, the whole world switches, we're done, we don't talk more about climate change. That's not entirely true, but it's roughly true. If we get the innovation right, we fix this problem. If we don't get the innovation right, we probably don't. And that's why innovation really is the crucial bit in figuring this problem out.
Thank you. Till now, it's a little bit too harmonious for me, but we will spice it up, hopefully. And we're going back to your slide of, going back to your slide also of the Nordhaus figures. So you claim 3.5 degrees, right? At the end of the century.
So the point here is, and this is the difference between sort of political policy analysis and a straight-up economic analysis. Everybody talks about, we need to go net zero. Do anyone have any sense of how much that's going to cost? Well, we actually have two studies. So New Zealand went net zero, or decided they were going to go net zero. They asked their preeminent economic institution to find out how much will this cost us. The average answer was, they had three different scenarios. The average answer is 16% of their GDP by 2050. There's a new study in Nature that couldn't quite get to 100%. It went to 95% of Biden's promise. It would cost 11.9%. Just to get a sense of proportion, that's $11,300 per person per year in the US in 2050. Remember, the average, there's not a majority in America right now for a $24 cost for climate. So I'm very interested to see what you guys are promising, but it's certainly not reflective for most parts of the world. So we're simply setting ourselves up to fail if we believe that we're going to get anywhere near net zero with these kinds of costs. That's going to cost yellow vest all over, except if we get innovation.
I think we can agree on that. This is for hypocrites a little bit, this net zero.
It's not a little bit, it's phenomenally hypocritical.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, whatsoever, it has maybe slightly a religious aspect on the whole background on it, But we forgot now your 3.5%. 3.5 degrees, sorry. This is enormous amount. I informed myself. Last time this happened was in the Pliocene, so millions and millions of years ago. And researchers tell us that if it goes up to 3.5, 1 billion people will die because it's so enormously hot that they cannot cope with that anymore. Maybe let the other gentleman comment on that a little bit.
I would like to comment on, Nordhaus is the godfather of climate economics, but the numbers you give are now thoroughly out of date. Because they're academically out of date and they're politically irrelevant. They're politically irrelevant because countries have signed up to 1.5, whether they like it or not, and I agree with you that's going to be very costly, and they have not signed up to 3.5 degrees. And then the reason why it's academically out of date, there's a lot of excellent work done by Michael Greenston and Solomon Ishyang, and they've got a climate where they, for the first time, they really try to estimate econometrically the cost of climate change. The damages that are in the Nordhaus model, they are really made up. I'm sorry to say, they are really based on some kind of study somewhere in Indonesia in 1955, and then they're blown up. It doesn't pass any rigorous academic tests. But the work of Michael Greenston and others do, and then what they show is that their damages from global warming are affected 10 times, 12 times higher than those of Nordhaus. So then, if you do optimal policies with their damages, you would go to roughly about 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Okay, but the number still is frightening.
And then secondly, what's missing in these analyses and what drives some of the urgency to just have a bit of debate is that Nordhaus doesn't really allow for uncertainty. We have at least about 9 important tipping points, risks of tipping. So that's only these ice sheets are melting. That takes a long time before they melt. The reversal of the Gulf Stream, the melting of the permafrost, and then if that melts, then a huge amount of methane comes out. And the reason why scientists, not economists, say let's try to stay below 1.5 degrees, because then these risks of these tipping points being unleashed is being kept manageable. And that's why people, it's not a welfare measure, it's just a kind of a resilience measure. So you could argue that economists have thought too much about maximizing welfare, and we should talk about economies being resilient. And that's what this 1.5 degrees is roughly trying to do.
Yeah, okay. Lucas and then Bjørn.
Yes, I think we should distinguish when we talk so prominently about Nordhaus contribution is the optimal solution here. We should distinguish between the respect for an academic achievement, for being a pioneer, for making these things available to the whole community. This was actually was honored, but with his numbers, I agree with Rick here, this is outdated, and some people made the effort to update the original model with some assumptions with more recent data, and they come up with something which is much closer to the official policy goal. So there I can say many things have already been alluded to. Well, what is not in the Nordhaus model, damage functions is not correctly done. Risk is not in. Discounting is a big issue. This was the big debate with Nick Stern in the United Kingdom. I mean, we have how do we treat future generations? Are really less worse than we are today? I talked about dynamics, not this all something which comes out of the blue in the Nordhaus model, even population growth. We have actually integrated all this. And then there's so many elements which are not in there. And then I just want to ask you another thing, abatement cost. How much is it? How much does it cost to emit 1 ton of CO2? When you look at electric cars, it is more costly to put the first electric car on the road when all the other cars are ICE cars, or the last. When all the other cars are already electric, you put still the last car. You place where is the cost higher? Of course, in the beginning, it's much more difficult to start this process. So many scale and network effects. And the last one is easy because everybody else has already changed. And in Nordhaus, if you look up, it's exactly the opposite. It's steeply increasing cost. This is incorrect, has a big impact on the outcome. And then I wanted to comment on the last thing, because I'm already taking the floor.
What you're saying, that it's very misleading.
It is misleading. Okay, then I say, thank you.
Should we correct that or not?
No.
No, we let it be like this.
We let it be.
Yeah. Afterwards, at the coffee break, you can discuss
exactly.
this.
So I'm not a fan of political correctness. So
Okay.
the last thing is what actually came up before. Nothing has happened so far correct. If you look at official statistics, I think development is under the surface. This is why I believe in the 2020s many things will happen. They have been prepared before, but we don't see them. People look through a straw; they cannot see what's going on. But I will promise that much more will come. And it's not independent of policy. Policy is important to start and to accelerate, but so far we did not deliver. Absolutely.
Okay. What are the most?
Sorry,
okay.
I got
You have
reply.
to. You have
Yes,
to
I do.
shortly. Good.
Yes.
Okay.
So fundamentally, there's 2 points to this. One is this really vastly underestimated the cost? And sure, you can find models that give 10 times the cost, as we saw. Swiss Re just multiplies it by 10. Another one of the collaborators that you were talking about, Burke, basically finds this by extrapolating what I think is a spurious correlation, but he's basically suggesting that the winners of this century, that's how you get to cost in the 20% range, the winners in this century is going to be Mongolia and Iceland, because they're cold countries, or the cost, that's also saying that these costs are mainly because people forget to buy air conditioning, and so people in Boston dies much more in 2100 than people in Phoenix die today, because somehow Bostoners are just stupid. There's a lot of these kinds of costs, but if you actually incorporate that people behave smartly, it is very hard to get these models to give much higher costs. At the same time, of course, we're also forgetting that the cost of policy, and we've all three talked about that. I showed you the cost of policy if everyone does everything correctly, smartly, all the way through the century, coordinated with every other nation on planet Earth. Now,
how would that work? How would that work?
Yeah, that's not going to work, right?
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, it's going to be much, much more costly. Remember, the EU, which is a reasonably functional unit, makes climate policy that's much more costly than it needs be for political reasons. So the costs are going to go up a lot. And then finally, and then I'll shut up, you say that we've already promised 1.5 degrees. Yeah, well, it's not like the world hasn't promised a lot of other things. So I work with a lot of other issues. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, they promised 68 times to give education to everyone in Africa. And now we're almost there, but it took half a century, right?
There's one difference. There's one difference, one important difference. Governments have signed up to 1.5 degrees, whether they like it or not. They are being taken to court.
Nobody who can take you to court for that.
Well, I'll show you. In the Netherlands, they did not only have the first agenda case, but an agenda took the government to court, and they are now forced to change their policies and to make credibly sure that they will reach
well-educated people.
But they also
they're
well-educated
because of you, like in Switzerland, or not so, after our voting for carbon reduction. Go on.
I think the legal, so it's almost out of the hand of the economists, because now these NGOs and other people are making a litigation issue. And also taking Shell and BP to court.
Uganda said that they were going to do this for 2030, for 2020, because it was an EU decision, but they did not think that the commitment in Paris would be enough for the longer point.
So it was against the Dutch government.
No, but for the Dutch government, it would only restrict them in 2020 and not for.
Yeah, of course, but it's the beginning.
But that's exactly the point. These are not something that you can run legal court.
For me, that's a little bit too local, because we have to think global to get the climate changing. Otherwise, it does not work at all. And now we are back on that. How can we politically implant these tasks? If we look at China, India doesn't even comment on that. They have huge problems.
Can I say
also
one
Africa,
one thing on this?
without establishing a non-existing world government.
Yeah. So I just want to make clear the extent of the problem. So here we probably not the people. So if you get a house off the gas, for example, you might have to pay 50,000 euros. Imagine you're a modest income person. It's a hell of a lot of money. And the government doesn't want to pay the money to compensate them for that. And then that's one problem. Another problem is we're going to have solar and wind energy, but that's very intermittent. You might have noticed that gas prices, electricity prices have really gone through the roof. They've gone through the roof in the UK, probably in France as well, and the Netherlands. And the reason for that is that there's not been enough gas reserves to keep the price low. So the big problem is storage. So we're going to get a new type of energy, which is kind of intermittent. It only when the sun shines and the wind blows. So if we don't solve that battery problem, there will be much more volatility in these electricity prices, and that'll really hurt people. And that's the biggest challenge, to get it over the pass. Because otherwise, families.
I'm sure you're right, but you're escaping my question again. So I don't put it now. We can discuss it later. But this is for me the single most important question: how we get to that point. I mean, we can say yes, this and that, and in the Netherlands it works like this. And Lucas, how does it work in Switzerland?
Well, I don't know if we are the world. We are small compared to the rest. You talk about
of course,
the big
but
picture.
not so small.
Well, and we did not do extremely well this year with our policy, so we have not, we could not have a big mouth about our achievements, but we did not even increase our ambitions. You asked before about the big blocks, and I think they're basically in agreement. Of course, the rhetorics are different. For example, China is, of course, a huge kind of contradictions you see there. They're adding renewables like hell, but they still do also conventional. They do all kind of things. But in principle, I think the big powers are aligned at the moment. The United States is not so reliable as it should be, because you never know what could happen in the next term. So what I wanted to push here is this technology race that you see. If you're not in, you're lagging and you're lost. You're the loser.
Right.
So rather be the first. I think companies in California did that. They were winners, and others, they will lose. And once this is understood, then a country naturally wants to jump on the train rather than to be left behind. So this is what I believe is actually. But it takes time, and somehow, as Rick mentioned, there are tipping points not only in technology but also in the perception of the public.
The mindset.
The mindset. And then also, I think it's also a thing about public majorities, about the majorities of voting. When we want to implement the carbon tax, and we are very convinced that this is the best way to do, but people don't like it in a referendum. We could put forward other policies first, which work better, which are not that cost efficient, but work somehow. Sometimes people like bans, they like standards, they like other stuff. As soon as you have a vast political majority, then you can actually vote on carbon taxes. You will have a higher rate of approval. The proof of the example that we have was tobacco taxes. We knew then for a long time that smoking is bad for your health, but actually it was disputed for a long time. Similar here with climate change. When it became clear, people still didn't like to pay more for their cigarette tax. As long as when the non-smokers became the majority, then the taxes jumped up. So this thing is the way to proceed, in my view. First, step in with policies which are not that cost efficient, and then later on we can do rather quickly, I believe. So this is my optimistic take of it.
Thank you. Bjørn cannot wait to tell us his story.
So I totally agree with the technology, and I think, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be this, it's about being the winner. This is really going to be a long race. And yes, there are potentially great opportunities, but there's probably first a lot of failure. So my guess is it's much, much more about getting every country to realize you're not going to solve global warming doing it the same way we've tried for the last 30 years. You are going to solve this if we invest dramatically more in research and development into green energy. And as you just mentioned, Rick, if you think about for instance storage, a lot of people will say the point of getting storage is to level out solar and wind. But I mean, honestly, it seems much more likely, again, I don't know, and I don't know the future, I don't think any of us know, but it seems much more likely to me that it's going to be fusion or fission that's just going to come around and basically wipe out all this rather inefficient solar and wind, and then we can actually get back to having reliable 24/7 power that's also fantastically cheap. And so we really have to be careful. Do you guys remember those compact fluorescent light bulbs? Certainly in the EU, I don't know if they forced them on here, but in the EU,
more or less,
you basically had to get rid of all your incandescent light bulbs to get those horrible lamps. And then 5 years later, we all have LED lamps.
Yeah.
And there is something wrong about the idea of saying, no, this is the way to, to fix the problem if it turns out that there's another technology right around the corner. Again, I'm not saying that this is just an argue on a metaphor, so we shouldn't take that too seriously, but we should be very careful that we don't force a technology into which that's not actually going to be the end of where we want to go. It's about technology.
But you know what the problem is. I mean, so I agree everything you say and what you.
It's horrible.
No, but on one point I don't. I mean, technology is the crucial issue. But if you say fusion or fission, I'm involved with a fusion company. That's not round the corner.
It's 20 years away.
Even a simple thing that we all learn at school, like hydrogen. Which hydrogen is storage, is just electrolysis. We learn it at school when you're 15 or 14. It's still about 15 years down the road. And fusion, I know for sure, because I invest in one, it takes 20, 30 years before we get down there. Very important. But then we toast it.
This is where we strongly disagree.
But you disagree on that. But that means you all these 1.5 degree targets.
Yes.
Then you can only argue, forget about them. They're infeasible. Go for something less dramatic. Whereas I would argue, I still like to try to kind of go for these 1.5 degrees target.
Yeah, and look, I'm simply saying we can meet here again in 30 years, and it's absolutely
too late.
Well, but it's absolutely sure that your target will be missed. I mean, it's not even worth a bet.
But you write books, false alarm. You talk about we are all too alarmist. But you see the weather changing, you see the climate changing, you see insurance companies, and they make the money out of these risks. They seem to getting away. You see financial regulators, central bankers getting worried about it. Well, then I don't think I'm too alarmist when I say let's try to do something about it.
And
there we disagree.
The Swiss Re guys showed you that normalized damages are going up. The actual academic literature, and I'd love to show you that, actually shows it's going down when you correct normally. I wrote the guy while we were talking, and he came back and said, yes, I have no idea how he gets this, but that's not what the period literature shows. So yes, of course, insurance companies are telling you, we'd like to ask you to pay more for your insurance. I can see why that would be the case, but I'm not sure I would want to bet on them being the moral arbiters of truth.
Of course, but they also have to make their money. That's absolutely normal in a capitalist world, as we still are, hopefully and thankfully. And it's nice to watch the lively discussion between the two friends here on the podium, and I'm sure they have future meetings to develop these topics more and more. I have my last question, which is some sort of a taboo for a longer time, also in Switzerland, unfortunately, but also in other countries. What about the fourth generation of nuclear power? Short answer, Lucas, Rick, Bjørn.
It's not around the corner.
Why?
Well, it is not ready yet. Third generation, you agree, not good.
Is it so bad?
No, well, there is a cost concern, there is a risk concern, there's a timing concern. It will be too late. So this is why I think we should go. Other things are much cheaper, ready to go.
Should we invest more in the fourth generation?
No.
No, you're not.
Well, if you want to invest, you're free to do that.
Okay, but you are against.
Put your mouth.
Yeah,
put
put
the money where your mouth is.
I find a company which will do it, and when it's safe,
seek for private investors in this. And you don't find many.
And you too?
It takes too long and it's too expensive. Yeah.
Okay, Bjørn too?
No, absolutely we should be investing in fourth generation. It's one of the many things that could solve this problem.
Thank you. Good. Okay.
But at a price.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay, now that's... we have a mix now. You can think about that now. So let's look at your questions, ladies and gentlemen. It's question round for hardly 5 minutes, but if the questions are short, the answers hopefully will also be shorter. So, please. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Professor Ernst Fehr. You started.
Yeah, now it works. So for me, the most important takeaway was that what Rick said about the new estimates of climate change costs, because Michael Greenstone is not just one economist. He's the Milton Friedman professor at the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
He's a free marketeer guy. He believes in markets, and he indeed estimates the climate costs to be more than 10 times higher than the original estimate by Nordhaus. And Bjørn, you never responded to that properly.
Oh, okay. So
You never responded to that.
I get the
I
chance
think
now.
I believe much more in Greenstone's estimate than in your outdated ones. So why should I believe not the new ones, the new empirical estimates that are based on rigorous science, on rigorous econometrics, instead of these back-of-the-envelope calculations that somebody did who has historically done something important, but that are not valid anymore?
Well, there's a lot of push. So 2 years ago, there's an annual review of is the 2-degree target worthwhile? No, sorry, the 1.5 degree cost effective, and they were really struggling to say that it might just actually be. There's an enormous push for a lot of researchers to come up with saying that it's a lot more costly. It's very easy to show that these costs are very costly because you just ignore adaptation. But if you don't ignore adaptation, which is what all of these studies do, and you sit and shake your head, again. Look, I'm not.
But
arguing.
even allowing for adaptation. So adaptation is
Yes.
that people might move when a city gets flooded. They move up the hill.
No,
or
it's that they
you may
actually
get more heat-resistant crops.
No, they protect their cities at incredibly low cost.
There's a whole range of adaptation measures.
But don't
Dikes.
say move when they actually stay put and they know how to fix this incredibly cheaply, and we have those models. The point is, if you don't include that adaptation, if you make these models and simply take what is likely, and very often these come from the US, which is very, very badly adapted.
Bjørn, you're not listening. So I'm just saying that there are models which allow for all these types of adaptation you mentioned. Rossi Hansberg, the guy in Princeton, has done that. And it does, it's right. It does make the cost a bit lower, but they still are very large.
Okay, now there's another question over there. Sorry.
Okay, I would like to bring a completely maybe unexpected aspect to the social costs of climate change. I'll be flying tomorrow to Guyana. You guys probably never heard of this country. It's on the northeast coast of South America. They have found 5 years ago huge oil and gas reserves. Guyana is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Now, what should the Guyanese people do? Should they forget about pumping this oil and using the money to develop the country to introduce, for example, green technology? Or should they leave it in the ground and stay poor? So I would like to ask the panel here, how should the politicians and the people of Guyana take care of this problem? The oil reserves per capita are higher than Kuwait.
It's a good question. It's a good question. Senegal, exactly the same. The same situation. What should they do with the oil they find? So go ahead, Lucas.
Well, you know, we did some considerations about equity and fairness, because those countries who are still poor and did not exploit the natural resources so far, they can claim that they have a right to do so in the future to get some wealth, like Norway, coming out from poverty into a very developed state. And if we don't want them to do that, we have to compensate them. We have to help them. Otherwise, it will happen, and we cannot make it undone. So I think if you look at this equity criteria and historic responsibility, they would have the right to do so. But the world community as a whole has a big incentive to tell them, please don't do everything, and we will compensate for the rest. We will give you free technologies. We will help you with other things. It is, of course, in the end, if the new technologies are much cheaper than burning fossil fuels, still not that a good investment. So if it's true that you can use electricity produced with new renewables, which is much cheaper than if you boil just your oil that you pump out of the ground, then still you might consider not exploiting. So in the end, some of this stuff has, especially for coal, has to remain in the ground, otherwise we will never make the temperature targets.
Okay, maybe one more question here in the audience, far behind. Oh, gets really lively, it's good.
Well, thank you. So if I understood this panel correctly, then the main message, the main takeaway of this meeting was, if you have a serious problem, wait for someone very smart in the future to solve it for you. So how would you comment on that?
Bjørn?
No, it's making sure we spend a lot more money on making these smart ideas come out. I mean, yes, it'd be great to just wait for Elon Musk to solve it, but it's much more reliable to actually say we're going to spend this on a vast range of different areas. So we did a study on what are the most effective investments in climate, and we found that the long-term best investment is indeed in more R&D, because it both drives much more growth of knowledge. It has a higher probability of we actually finding a solution that'll fix this problem. It's also likely that it'll provide a lot of other benefits. Remember, it's sort of typically argued that when the Americans spent $60 billion to go to the moon, you also made Velcro. It's not a true story, but it's sort of a good idea of saying you get a lot of other side benefits. We'll probably get much better cell phone batteries. And then the last thing is it's phenomenally much cheaper than the current policies that are not going to succeed.
Okay, one last question in the audience. Here is the last one. I mean, for the time being.
We should also see the result, right?
Yeah, of course. Here, the gentleman in the middle row.
Thanks. Actually, I just wanted to refer to the first UN conference in '92 in Rio de Janeiro, and it was about three things: carbon, watersheds, and biodiversity. I didn't hear one word about watersheds and biodiversity so far during this whole meeting. And I think they also have to be built in those economic models. And just a little remark, natural systems, they don't work according to economic laws. However, you can have jumps, and it's non-linear. How do you model that into those economic models?
Who would like to answer that, Rick?
Yeah, so you're completely right. I mean, but the panel was supposed to talk about climate, but what you say about the water and particularly the biodiversity is absolutely crucial. So one of the things economists are beginning to move is to first measure it. So you're trying to measure natural capital, look at all the different types of biodiversity. It's not an easy matter. World Bank has done some earlier stuff on it, and there's a new biodiversity committee in the UK, chaired by Sir Parvati Gupta, and they set the groundwork. And I think what we will see is that more and more economists will work on biodiversity in the coming years than maybe instead of climate. It's not because it's less important. It is extremely important. So I thank you very much for drawing attention to it.
In the long run, it's the most important, actually.
Yeah,
if we don't adapt to nature, obviously we have to go to Mars at the end of the day.
Yeah,
so that's not an option.
That's not really a prospect.
Can I also just, you probably all know about the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not like climate or biodiversity or watersheds are our only issues. Right now, there's 1.5 million people die from tuberculosis. There's probably about 10 million people die every year from easily curable infectious diseases. There's malnutrition, there's bad schooling. About a third of all people in school in developing countries don't learn anything. There's lots and lots of other problems. And so it's a little bit easy for us in the rich West to say and sit and fret about temperatures in 80 years. But for most people, and that also goes to your question, Guyana, for most people in the developing countries, they actually care about their kids not dying tonight.
Of course.
And we forget that. And of course, that also reflects something that we didn't have a chance to talk about at all. What's the right social discount rate? How much do we care about the future? It's easy for us to sit here because we believe we're all going to end up pretty old before we die. But for most people in the world, that's not a given. And so their discount rates are much, much higher.
Okay, that's almost the ending, a good ending. Now we have a look at the voting, and I hope you were honest. Let's see what that shows us. Oh, can anybody read that?
2 to 5%.
For me,
That's a lot of money, isn't it?
That's a lot of money. Yeah, Swiss is alright.
I would have said the yellow one is the biggest one. So that's
so the yellow one, how much per?
2 to 5%.
2 to 5% here. Well, it's not so bad. The green is the second biggest. How much is that?
6 to 10.
6 to 10. Well, okay. Look, that looks very optimistic.
not if you're a minister of finance, then 2
Yeah.
to 5% purchasing power loss is
but
if
you know,
lose the
we,
elections.
we Swiss are always the paragon of good behavior.
Can I just say this is vastly, vastly outside what you get when you survey people. I mean, either you guys are incredibly nice or incredibly sort of altruistic, or you just didn't do the sums.
No, I think people are extremely smart because this is not money you give up, money that you invest in your future. And if the future is better, then you invest. It's a good investment.
Okay, that's very nice that we can read this result in different ways. I don't think it's really representative for a majority of the world population who have really other concerns right now, as Bjørn said in his last word. I would, one last question for you after all. If you three gentlemen had the power to enforce what you think is right today, would you enforce it also against the contradiction of the majority of the people? Just yes or no? Lucas?
No.
No? Rick?
Well, I think if I think if you're take the Dutch situation or even the UK situation, if you've been a prime minister for 12 years, it's time that you do something unpopular and that you leave a legacy. So then you can stop coal power immediately today. You can do a number of things. Stop all the fossil fuel subsidies immediately, and that's nothing to do about left wing or right wing. Just taking responsibility.
Okay, you would do it. Bjørn?
No.
No. 2 no's and 1 yes. Think about that in the next future.
Yeah, that's why
thank
they're
you
longer.
again for this very lively discussion. And